Today, we're sharing the 10 rules of money that'll give you freedom and peace of mind. These 10 rules are pivotal in helping you win with your finances and win in life.
Welcome to All Things Financial, Season 2, Episode 2, Trey Peterson and
Yelisey Coots.
And I'm excited for today. Today we get to talk about the 10 rules of money. And as many of you know, we have a wealth management firm in Burnsville, Minnesota. We're licensed across the country. We have clients all over. Specifically, those in and nearing retirement is who we work with. We've got well over 300 families all across the country. Average age is right around 65. Our goal with this is to help people in and nearing retirement, but also for those of you that are young, maybe you're middle age, and really you're just wanting to win with your money. And the goal of our podcast is to help people win with their money so they can win in life. So we've got an exciting episode today. So the 10 rules of money. What's rule number 1?
Rule number 1, I think it's maybe the most important rule. And I don't know that we put these in any particular order, but it's one that I especially like. It's called give the first 10. Give the first 10. So obviously you and I come from a Christian background. So for us, maybe this comes as kind of a standard part of our typical Sunday teaching that we experience, where we talk about tithing, giving 10% to God or to the church of anything that you make. But I think it's a rule that probably goes far beyond what you hear in Christian circles. Like you hear about people all the time, whether they're believers or not, they talk about giving and being generous. And at least for me, I think early on in life, I didn't really, maybe in high school and college, I didn't really have like a clear sense of purpose. I didn't always know what my life would look like. I knew I always wanted to do something great with my life. I just didn't know exactly how that would pan out, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like giving and being generous, whether it was with my church or other charitable organizations, I feel like that gave me at least some sense of purpose. Like I felt like it was just an important part of my life. And I feel like in some ways it's led me to pursue financial success in the things that we're doing, because I've always wanted to give more and be able to do those things.
Yeah, that's great. I never had a failure till right out of college. Got into commercial insurance. Thought it'd be my dream job. I had a guy at church that said, "Trey, what do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "I don't know, but I want to control my time. I want to control my income, and I want to help people." And he said, "Welcome to commercial insurance." And all I knew is that this guy made like 350 grand a year. He golfed a lot. I don't golf, but I liked that he could. And he was a great husband, great father. And so I followed him into the commercial insurance space, which is a great space. I just found that it wasn't my space. And I went through a couple of years where I felt I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, surrounded by the wrong people, at least not my tribe. And for me, staying plugged into my church, tithing, giving, like you said, for me during that time, it was kind of my rock. And so I would say that, what's interesting is we both have that Christian background, but even in reading personal development and different biographies of, just different business leaders that America's had, what's interesting is even if people do not have the faith background, it's almost like it's in them to give at least 10%. Now, obviously, I think God put that there, but I do think it's important to start by giving, and not by giving the last 10 if it's there, but by giving the first 10. And then one of the things that, that we live by as we've had more success, not just doing that 10%, but doing things above that, over and above. So lesson number 1, start by at least giving the first 10.
I think both you and I were pretty economically conservative. And I think that there's this idea that everybody, who's a Republican, who's found some success, or conservative, they seem to think that we've all pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps. It's a little misleading. Like when I look at the success that we've had and the people that have come along the way, that have either mentored us, that have given us, whether they've given us advice or actually whether they've helped us, I feel like there's no way to accomplish what we have without other people. And not only our staff that we have here in the office, but just there's so many things that play. And I feel like giving back, being generous, and having that attitude of generosity, like for us, we've made that into one of our core values. We want our team members and people who join our team. I think even in the interviews, we in a roundabout way kind of ask, like, what are those things for you? What's important to you outside of just, providing for your family, and how do you give back to your community? I think that's an important aspect, and we definitely value that here.
Yeah, and obviously generosity is more than money, right? Generous with your time, generous with your words, generous with the way that you love on and treat people. And so one of our core values is generosity.
Lesson number 2, spend less than you earn. So
Jeez.
Maybe
say it again for those in the back.
It took a long time. It took a long time to come up with this one. I was, it seems obvious, but we've been doing this long enough to know that even like some of these rules, like as we go through them, you might think, hey, those seem kind of basic. But like we meet a lot of people, and you would think that like the basic rules, like everybody would follow those rules. Like we're in wealth management. That's what we do for people. But we have people coming in here all the time who maybe don't have a lot of wealth, not because they haven't made money, but because they couldn't stick to the basics, spending, living within your means. And I think that that's an important thing. When you look at like the three biggest expenses that most of us have in life, I would say housing has probably got to be one of those.
Yep.
Probably transportation, like a vehicle,
100%.
and maybe paying your taxes, right? If you pay, well, of
Right.
course, we should all pay our taxes. Yeah, and I think it's important. Like, obviously, there's a lot of things that, like, whenever you decide, like, and we'll talk about different ways of budgeting and how people do that. I know you do yours a little bit differently than I do. At the end of the day, all of them come down to living within your means, right? Even though you might do things a little differently.
Yeah.
Like, I think for you prefer the margins approach. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
One of the things that I think our listeners will have is that we have different preferences in how we do things.
Yeah.
And one of those is, for me, I'm not a budget guy. Yelisey, you'll get into how you budget and what that looks like. Obviously, very different for me. For me, it's margins. So, like, I started off, my first 10 always went to the church. I always had at least another 5% that was like over and above offerings for missions and different things I was passionate about. And then I would say I always had, 10 or 15% that I invested into things I was doing, typically things that I had control over. So whether it was another small business, whether it was real estate and remodeling, I was a big fan of spending money in ways that I had control over it. And then we lived off the difference. Now, as our income has grown, the margins have shifted, right? So, now we live on less than 40% of what we make, probably even less than that. We put a lot of money into real estate, whether it's the home that we live in, the other properties that we have. And then we invest in other businesses, typically ones that I have control over. And then I don't invest in the stock market to get rich, but we do for stability and retirement. Mutual funds, ETFs. A lot of people ask me, are you doing crypto online? Are you investing in specific individual stocks? And we've done very little of that, which is probably rare for a young financial advisor. But for me, if I can invest that money into things that I can put my time, my energy, and build a team around, for me, that's been more successful.
Yeah, I think I have like an unhealthy relationship with tracking. Like I like to track every expense, and it's not, like, we have very rigid guidelines in my family of like, hey, we can only spend this much on going out to eat. This is how much we spend for housing. This is what we spend for. We don't have anything like that. For us, it's more so like I try to make conservative decisions on everything, but I track everything too. So at the end, when I look at it, for me, it's mostly I want to feel comfortable with how much I'm saving, and I definitely try to save probably more than like whatever the recommended amount would be, because I don't know, like I grew up poor. We didn't have anything. So for me, I feel better knowing I have an extra cushion if something goes wrong, if there's a financial emergency. One of the things that was a bit of a challenge for us in our relationship, like, my wife is very accommodating to a lot of like my preferences, at least when it comes to the finances. But one of the unusual ones that was tough for her is how much I love to give to my parents and my family, and making sure that we're taking care of them, because I feel like my family did so much for me, and how much we give to the church and all these things, because I don't know if she just, we come from similar backgrounds, but at least not when it comes to the finances. And for me, that was such an important thing, but I'm kind of really sporadic, right? So some things I'm very frugal on, and some things I'm very generous on. And for her, she's always left like trying to figure out, like, is this a generous moment or is this a moment where he's penny pinching? And that's been the challenge for her, because I will say, like, I just have a crazy generous moment, and it's like, where did that come from? You just made us buy, food off the dollar menu at McDonald's, kind of thing. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key things around spending less, before we move on to point number 3, is one of the areas that I think I've helped people the most is, as your income grows, the biggest thing that you don't want to do is lock yourself into payments, because then you lose your flexibility, right? So one of the things that we often see is, as people's income grows, they'll go buy a bigger house, and nothing wrong with buying a bigger house. I love having a nice house, but they break the rules around what percentage of your income should go towards housing. So I recently met with a couple. He got a new job, got a $30,000 a year raise. And he said to me, he goes, man, I'm so excited. I've wanted a new truck my whole life. I've never owned a truck, never owned a new vehicle. My goal is to do that. And I said, let me encourage you in something. I said, instead of buying the new truck, being that you landed the job yesterday, tomorrow, I said, wait 3 or 4 months and just wait to see what it feels like to have the extra cash. I said, otherwise, you're going to go buy a new truck. You're going to have a $600 to $800 car payment, and you're going to eat up almost all of the increase that you just got in your new job. I'm not saying not to go buy the new car, don't go buy the new house. Look at the percentage of your income that you're spending on those things. I had a conversation with somebody over the weekend, and he goes, "Hey," he goes, "I need some advice. My wife and I bought a new house 3 years ago through a builder. The first 3 years, they paid down the interest, but now it popped up from like 3.5 to 5%." And he said, between our mortgage, our property tax, and our insurance, the payment's going to be over $4,000 a
Right.
month. And I said, "Well, what do you bring in per month?" And he said, "Well, around $8,300 a month." I said, "So your home is consuming almost 50% of your take home pay." It was like 54% after we calculated everything. And so I said, that's too much. I said, "You're not going to have any fun money. You're not going to have any peace of mind money."
Right.
I said, "You need to get that into that 25 to 30% range or less." And so, big thing on spending less than you earn, don't lock yourself into big car payments or big mortgage payments that now you don't have control over.
That 50-30-20 rule, where 50% basically goes for all of your needs, everything, all of the utilities, the bills, all the things that you have to have. 20%, I'm sorry, 30% goes for some of the fun
Investing.
stuff. Well,
Oh,
the fun stuff, yeah.
oh, got it.
Well, and then the remaining 20% after all that goes towards the investments. And I feel like there's a lot of those. There's a rule of thumb for everything, and there's not. It's not like it's not unanimous, right? There's a lot of dissent on some of
Yeah.
these things, but as long as you're following some type of schedule, I would say that's probably better than what most people do. I mean, we run into this all the time. People are getting ready to retire, and this is the first time they've been introduced to a budget. When they're 65 years old.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, anything is better than nothing. Definitely, and I don't know if it's later on. I'm trying to keep track of these rules, but where we talk about savings and how much you should have in terms of monthly savings to cover your expenses, I think you'd agree probably 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, you should have at least 3 to 6 months. I think when Steph and I first started making more money, she wanted to keep more than 6 months. And part of that is she grew up without
Yeah,
anything.
she grew up like me.
Yeah, she did. She grew up. I mean, even when she was in high school, there were times she woke up and there was no hot water because the water bill wasn't paid. So she was boiling water to shower before high school. And so for her, having that, I think, was peace of mind. I grew up in a home that I remember when we didn't have a lot, but by the time I got to high school, we were middle class or a little above that. And so I have never really had a fear of losing or going backwards. I think because I had that stability. But for me, I almost have the opposite. It's like if my savings hits over, I don't know, maybe it is like 8 or 12 months, probably 12 months. If it goes over that, I'm like looking for something to invest it in. And whether it's a business or a friend's business or something, like to me, like that money sitting there as dead money probably irritates me as much as a lot of people need to see more money there. So saving is important, but once you get over that 3 to 6 months, investing is also very important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Rule number 3.
Debt is a tool. Use it wisely. I feel like debt is as much a problem as it is a tool, right? For the people where debt is a problem, it's a serious problem. Like we're talking about people with consumer debt, credit card, revolving debt. I mean, look at the interest rate that you're paying on that. But of course, there's other areas where debt can be very beneficial. I think the most obvious one is maybe your mortgage, right? The fact that you can put such a small amount down,
Yeah.
right? You're leveraging a small number of dollars for a very large asset. It isn't just like, hey, I fell in love with the paint on the walls or whatever.
Yeah.
You look at it a little differently. So it's possible to treat it that way. But I think aside from that, yeah, for most people, it's a great savings account, one that appreciates modestly.
I think it's important too that people understand there's 2 types of debt. There's good debt and there's bad debt. And the difference between good debt and bad debt is that good debt makes you money.
Yeah.
Now, I had a friend call recently and he's like, I've been flipping houses. I'm running low. I have an option to borrow some money. Here's what the rate is. And here's what I'd have to pay back. And here's the time period. And he was going to get charged. It was like 40% interest. And I go, that's insane. I go, run as far as you can.
Right.
So he goes, well, I can make money on the money. And I go, yeah, that's still bad debt. So one of the things I think that people need to understand is that bad debt is money that, you have it because you're using the credit card. You took a vacation that you think you deserved. However, you don't have the money to pay for it, which actually means that you didn't deserve it. You have all these bad debt things. And so what we see a lot, even for people in their late 50s and 60s, is that they've lived their whole life 30, 60, 90 days behind instead of getting disciplined for 6 months and living their whole life ahead. So if you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s and you've never lived ahead, I would encourage you to take 6 months, reach out to us. We can send you some budget sheets that are helpful, not just discouraging, but give you a plan. But if you can spend 6 months, paying off debt, increasing your income, maybe adding a part-time job on the side to pay off those credit cards, you can live the rest of your life ahead just by spending 6 months getting after it.
Initially, the reaction is, I don't know how I can live off of less. I don't know how I can cut anything out. But whenever they stay disciplined, they make those adjustments. We meet with them, 6, 8 months later,
Yeah.
and it doesn't feel like they've been missing out on anything. Somehow they've made that adjustment. They just know that this is part of the routine. And I think it's almost like when you're going on a diet, like whenever you're kind of undisciplined with your eating, it's really hard to imagine giving up certain things. But
Yeah.
once you get in the routine of it, once you start getting healthy, once you start, just at least having some accountability in something, which is basically what we offer to provide. In some ways, we're accountability partners when it comes to budgeting.
Yeah.
It's very doable. It's very manageable, and you can find yourself in a much better place 6 to 8 months from now.
Right. One thing I'll say as we move on to number 4 is I believe in good debt. However, one of the things I'm proud of is that we've never borrowed debt to build our business. So we're July 1st. We're just a week away from having an 8-year-old business. And in all of that, through COVID, through everything, we've paid cash for everything. Never borrowed a dollar from anybody. I think it's something that I'm proud of. How about you?
Especially proud of that. Which reminds me of one other area where debt can be good for business owners, right? Not only to start a business, because obviously if you leverage money to start a business and it ends up being successful, that was a good use of debt. But I just mean there's an additional incentive and a benefit if you have a business where you're actually able to write off the interest from that debt, whether you bought equipment or machinery or whatever you bought. You can the interest is deductible, right? It's not subject to the same limitations that home mortgage interest is, even though that could be deductible too if you itemize. But also you can depreciate certain assets where you can further leverage those dollars for other types of deductions. So there's a number of things that benefit business owners specifically. If that's something that people have questions on, we have a fantastic CPA who mostly deals with business owners who works with us here. So
great. Money lesson number 4, timing. I'm going to switch this one up a little bit. What I want to talk about is when you think about timing, I think one of the things that we do run into is people that try to time the market.
Yeah.
But really when I think about timing, I think about actually consistency, because one of the things that I know, and I know y'all say that you would agree with this, is that consistency really is the key to all long-term success. So as financial advisors, one of the things that we see is the people that were successful in accumulating assets, it's not always or not often even that they had high income. It's that for 35, 40, 45 years, they took a percentage of their paycheck and they saved it. They put it in the stock market, maybe in a target account, or they invested in some mutual funds, ETFs, some stock. And over that time, by being consistent, they ended up winning with their money. So one of the things I would say to people, though, is one of the keys is just to get started. It's amazing how many people that we meet with that they never got started or they got started really late. And so if you're in your 20s or 30s or maybe 40s and you've always said, I'm going to start next year, I'm going to start next quarter, but then you got married, you had kids, and you never had enough to save, really the key is just to get started. Put that money away before you get paid. Even if you start at 2 or 3% of your paycheck and then grow it by 1% every 6 months or every year, every time that you get a raise, that's where I think compounding interest comes in by starting early, which gives you time to win with your money.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. If you were to look at the variables that allow you to attain wealth, and you were to compare time, just how much time you have to invest versus an interest rate.
Right.
Like if you're playing catch up, just look at there's a number of articles, and this is very easy to find, how much of an interest rate you would have to keep up with time. Mm-hmm. Somebody who could have a modest rate of return who started early is going to be far and away ahead of you. It's really, there's almost no substitute for time and the ability to compound, just as you mentioned. And I think that really, it's been a little bit of a challenge since we're in the industry, I would say, over the last couple of years because of how much volatility we've had. I feel like people, they seem to think it's as simple as, buying the dips and selling when it's high and continuing that process over and over. That's not what we're doing here, by the way.
No.
And it's not a proven strategy. And in fact, there's so many studies that show that time in the market is way more effective than timing the market.
Right.
I think there was a Dalbar study or or I can't remember the other institution that showed that over a 20-year period, if you missed the 10 best days over a 20-year period, you could say goodbye to about 50% of your return.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they're cherry picking the time period,
Right.
but even if you move that, you're still like looking at, losing 30 to 50% depending on the time period. So, and if you're talking about the 10 best days over a 20-year period.
Yeah. How could you find those? Guess those.
Yeah. How are you going to guess those? Right. More than likely you're going to be making mistakes. And the person who's just steadily investing, dollar cost averaging, putting their money away, doing it every single month or every pay period, that person is going to be well ahead.
Right. I agree with that. Number 5, know your financial freedom number. If you go on social media, financial success, they always show these guys with a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, or like they've got this beautiful girlfriend and they're walking on a private plane going somewhere exciting. And I think as you grow up, like, I don't know what age that is, maybe your late 20s, early 30s, you realize that as cool as that is, that's not really what you're aiming for. I think what you're aiming for is financial peace. What you're aiming for is living the kind of life that you want, I would say comfortably. For my wife and I, we had a dream of having a home in a city that it's where my parents were, where my sister was. It was a home that we had land that we could have our German Shepherds and 4-wheelers and toys. And even though it'd be awesome to go build, a big, beautiful house, when I look at interest rates, when I look at what friends that have built these big, beautiful homes, what they're paying $12,000, $15,000 a month for a house, and I look at my mortgage that's, $2,600 a month. I don't want those things that bad. And so the reason I say that is I think your trade-offs change. And so we're doing a remodel instead of building a brand new home because it's so much significantly less. But when I think of knowing your financial freedom number, I think it's having that 3 to 6 months in savings, having absolutely no bad debt. I think it's being able to vacation when you want to vacation, and putting money into the stock market or into investments or another business every single month. And one of the things I've found as far as like what gives me peace is I don't necessarily have to have the goal that I set out for today, but I need to be on track. It's kind of like my fitness goals, like if I were to lay out the areas of discipline in my life, diet is the one that I fail in the most often. I work out hard, but man, eating clean. But when I think about it, even if I'm like 7 days into a big goal, I feel as good as if I had hit the goal. Figure out what that financial freedom number is. Like, what does savings look like? How much debt do you need to have paid off? And instead of always stretching so that you live your whole life stretching, have seasons where you stretch for things, but then seasons where you're in like relaxed savings mode. I've got a friend, he's a financial advisor, and he says, I have seasons of stretching and I have seasons of margin. And what I really like about that is when you live that way, you get the best of both. So if you're someone that is comfortable stretching for things, you're more likely to have success faster than somebody that does it slow. But if you live where you're always stretching, you're also going to have a wife that probably isn't very happy because you're always taking big risks. You're never letting her be comfortable or him be comfortable. And so one of the things that we do is we have seasons of stretching and then we have seasons of margin. If it was just my natural default, we'd probably always be stretching for things because I always want everything faster, mostly because I'm an achiever. Know what your financial number is. My wife and I have now agreed on here's what we have in savings that's comfortable for her. It's a bigger number than what I would keep there. I just would invest it all. But you should know what that number is. What does that look like? And if you can't hit that goal in 12 to 18 months, I think your goal needs to change or some big decisions need to change. Because one of the things I think a lot of people do is they live their whole life feeling behind. And if you can figure out what financial freedom, what that number looks like in savings with debt being down, I think that's a great way to live in the present and not always live in the future.
At the risk of being ridiculed by you, right?
Well,
I'm going to share how I personally.
Your freedom number is like 400 million in the bank.
Well, I do have a goal, but I was going to say just how I look at things a little differently than you, and I don't know that anybody relates to me, but have you ever like? I'm certain you don't relate to this, but for me, like I've purchased really nice things. Like I felt like I could do it. I felt like it wouldn't really cause any issue in terms of my budget or anything. It really wouldn't affect me. But just being disappointed in like and like the feeling isn't what you would expect it to be. Like I would expect that, I've saved up. This is something I've been pursuing and chasing for all these years and imagining what it would be like. And I eventually have it. And it's kind of like, meh, that was nice. I mean, that's kind of nice. I remember buying a really nice car. I had some car challenges and eventually the warranty ran out. And I remember like, well, this is more expensive to fix than the Honda that I used to drive or whatever, And I remember it just being something that didn't provide the same amount of joy and happiness that I thought it would. And obviously, I'm not saying that I don't like nice things. I'm just saying that probably I'm on the other side of that spectrum where it's like, I don't know, for some reason, I'm really enjoying the option to buy something without ever having to follow through with the purchase. So I like having the freedom to do it, but I don't necessarily need to do it. There was a car that I was very interested in. I did all the research. I thought it would be fantastic. I put my name on the list to be able to buy it when it finally became available.
You owned it.
And I felt like I owned it. But here's what made it better. I was so excited. I actually was going to pull the trigger, but then you bought that very car. And when I got the first drive in it, I felt like that need to buy it totally faded away. I felt like I felt like I had bought it in that moment, and it was just as good. I had the option to buy it. I'm now driving it, and it's all on your dime.
Yeah. You asked me something like a week or two ago, and I don't know if do you remember what you asked?
No.
Do you ever find that it's not what you thought it would be? You asked me that.
Well, it's like I still enjoy the things, but it's like, you know what it is? Maybe the pursuit of something is so fun because you don't know it. You're not feeling it, you're not touching it or experiencing it.
That's a big piece of
So
it.
it's like, there's something alluring about that.
Yeah, but basically your question is like, do you ever feel like you purchased it and you wish you wouldn't have? And I thought, no, I've never really had that feeling. But I even went home and I told Steph, I was like, hey, Yelisey asked me a good question. Like, do I wish I wouldn't have bought these things?
Yeah.
But I'm kind of on the...
I'm not talking about buyer's remorse. I just mean like, it doesn't give the same sense of satisfaction that you expected.
Yeah. Well, like buyer's remorse is actually a good term because what I actually get is when I buy something, I wish I would have bought it sooner. Yeah. Like almost always.
What did I do waiting so long?
Yeah.
What was I doing?
But I think too, like the vehicle that I drive, like I bought it in 2018. I've got a couple cars, but one of them,
not the one I'm talking about.
No. Yeah. Not the Tesla. So the one before that, I got my first EV. I bought the Tesla Cybertruck, which is the one that you almost bought.
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to share that because of the mixed reviews.
We've got fans, we've got people that hate it. It's so nice. Today I had somebody that told me they loved my car, and I was just thankful they didn't flick me off because I get that so often. Yeah. As I think about my other vehicle, which is just an SUV, I've had it for 6 years. I like it today more than the day I bought it. And I drive that probably 4 or 5 days a week. I love that vehicle. So I don't know what it is. I think part of it is when I go to buy something, I wait to make sure I get the right color combination. I do a ton of homework to make sure that of the top 3 competitors, it might not necessarily be the best one, but it's the one that I'm the most attracted to. So when I buy things, I feel like I love them. I don't mind spending money on things that help me enjoy the journey. But for you get more satisfaction seeing your savings go up than actually having that thing. Is my perspective. And I don't think that's bad.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Having that option to buy something I don't necessarily have to always go through with it. But I do like the savings going up because it does represent a level of safety for me.
Yeah. 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 And I think for me, it's like, man, I'm going to be 37 in a week or two, and I'm only going to live 80 some years. And some of these things I'm not going to want in my 70s or my 80s. And so anyways, whatever.
We could talk about how preferences have changed too over time, but moving on to the
number
next
6.
Number 6, protect your downside. A lot of what we do here is protecting someone's downside. In retirement, we do a lot of that. But I think if we broaden it out more generally, I think a lot of times for most people that represents some type of insurance, right? Health insurance, life insurance. I mean, what are you doing when you're buying insurance? You're leveraging your dollars and you're shifting the risk to an insurance company.
Yeah.
And that's a really big one, especially, here in the United States. Medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy, right? That's a big thing. We talk about budgeting. We talk about being goal-oriented, about pursuing certain numbers, right? We want to have a certain level of wealth so that we can provide for our families and also retire well. But also, what does it look like on the other side to protect that downside? And what should younger people do? What should people in retirement consider?
If you're young, you should have life insurance. Yeah. When my wife and I got married, I was like, you know what? I should get some life insurance so that she's taken care of if something ever happened to me. We were married for maybe a year and then we got pregnant. She got pregnant with our son, Cyrus. And, but when our son was born, it hit me like, I'm going to make sure that he's okay no matter what.
Yeah.
And so I went and got life insurance, a couple $1 million on me, $1 million on my wife, and if anything happened to her.
And also, I think you said that in case she marries, so you can set up her next husband.
Really important that her next husband
is well taken care of.
Is okay, but not rich. Not rich. So not too much. But I wanted to make sure that she was taken care of. And so I'm a huge, huge fan of term life insurance. It's very inexpensive.
Not that whole
It's
life
less,
universal variable.
man, maybe somebody can make me a believer, but I'm not
Right.
there today. $75 a month. I've got 2 million on me and 1 million on my wife. I think it started at 50 and it's gone up over the last 8 years.
Yeah.
But when I think about that, it's like now at $75 a month, I know that we have $3 million of life insurance our kids are taken care of. I think that was really important. I think in just like being a good man, I think being a good man is taking care of your wife, taking care of your kids. And so maybe you're not buying whole life insurance and paying $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 a month. But I do think if you're young, you should have term life insurance. The exception to that is if you've got $1 million or a couple million put away, or maybe you inherited some money, then you're probably what we'd call self-insured, right?
So what do? You buy term, and what do you do with the difference?
Invest the difference.
Invest the rest.
Yep. And I would
Good
say
rules.
this: best things to invest in, top 3 ways. If you make less than $250,000 a year, in my opinion, number 1 is invest in yourself. Go get that certification, go get a master's degree, do something that increases your income and your cash flow. People don't realize that's the number 1 wealth generator is income and cash flow. Number 2 is invest in the market, right? Retirement account, you get to write it off. If you work for an employee, some of those companies, many of them, especially if they're larger businesses, they have a free match. So for every dollar you put in, up to 3, 4, 5, 6%, they match it. We never give up free money.
Right.
Number 3, in my opinion, invest in a side business. Have a hobby or something on the side that makes you an extra 500,000 or a couple thousand a
Or
month.
has the potential to eventually, because a lot of times it doesn't start out that way, but it
Yeah,
does. Yeah.
100%. And if you think about it, even if you have something that makes an extra $2,500 a month and you get there within a year and it's a hobby that only takes 10, 15 hours a week, and you decide that's the money that you're going to invest, into another business or into the market, even that over time is significant.
When I was younger, I bought like the cheapest, most catastrophic plan. It had the highest deductible imaginable. It probably didn't cover like all the essential things that are actually considered financial emergencies, or maybe it only covered those. I'm not sure. But now that I have a family, I have 3 children, I have my spouse, like you said, making sure that you have adequate or appropriate levels of insurance coverage. The other thing is auto insurance. That's a huge one. Homeowners insurance. The prices on auto and homeowners insurance has gone up quite a bit. I know that when you initially you kind of did a little bit of that. Some of the horror stories that you shared with people getting state minimum coverages and the type of garnishment that happens to your wages whenever there is something that happens. That's a very real thing. And not only could that, take you off track. I mean, that could like eliminate your hope of like making it in life. So you want to make sure that you're adequately insured. And that's what I think of when we talk about protecting the downside.
Yeah, very good. Number 7, invest in what you understand. What's interesting is I have not invested in crypto. I know you've done a little bit. I'm a big fan of investing in things that you understand. If you can't explain it, if you don't understand it, in my opinion, stay away from it. Now, you're smarter than I am, so you probably understand how crypto works at a much better level than I do. But for me, I've invested in my businesses. I've invested in my homes, and we've done well on our houses. And then we've also partnered and invested with some other friends that have made us money. So I would say invest in things that you understand. One of the things I think that we did well too is while we spent our time in the business, we were always, like you said, we were putting time and money investing into homes that I knew had good upside. And so what I would tell people is, don't just buy something that you love, buy something that has potential. And don't just buy something because it's the right dollar per square foot, buy something that has potential. We got lucky in that our first home that we owned, we put it like $140,000 in 2 years into that house, remodeling it. And I walked away with a check for $283,000. Well, it's pretty rare that you can double your money in 2 years. But I do think that if you're thoughtful and if you know what to look for, that you can find that in real estate. And if you do that every 3 to 5 years, you're going to pay for that dream home just through doing what I would call is we had a second job. I didn't do the work with my hands, but I general contracted all of it. And so even though it was stressful at times, not only was I making money in my business, but I was building equity in our homes, which has really put us ahead.
Yeah, I think for most people, it might sound a little boring, but I would recommend just a fundamental approach, investing in a variety of asset classes, having diversification within your portfolio. And I think the challenging thing is like we all know the story of Apple, we all know the story of Tesla, and any company that's prominent, like Amazon today, right? And we all want to be able to be that guy who invested in those companies when they were worth, pennies compared to what they're worth today, or the same thing with crypto. The problem is it typically doesn't work out that way. And there's nothing wrong with investing in those things, but shiny, new, and complicated doesn't typically mean it's going to turn into Apple, Tesla and Microsoft or whatever. I think it's okay to do that with a small portion of your dollars.
Yeah.
It's okay to have some play money. It's okay to be adventurous and invest in some things that are interesting and fun, but I wouldn't do that. Just like we talk about not risking the mothership, same thing here with your investable assets.
Yeah. Well, I have good news. We are 7 rules in. The bad news is we're out of time.
We're out of time.
So we're going to wrap up with 7 rules of money.
Hey, I think 7 is a better number.
I think it's a great number.
The other 3 I haven't even looked at.
But let's say this. We want to close with, our goal is to help people win with their money and win in life. If you're in and you're in retirement, our goal is to help you retire once and retire well.
Actually, I just looked at number 10. It's a fantastic one, and I think we could do an entire podcast on that one rule.
Let's do it. Say it.
Money is a tool, not a goal. I think a lot of it comes down to your mindset. How you think about money determines how much money you have in many cases. And I think if you think about it as a tool, if you think about money as something that represents more options for you rather than, something that allows you to pay your bills and go on that vacation, I think that really sets you up for success.
Yeah. Episode 3, we're going to talk about how money is a tool. Come join us.
Advisory services are offered through CG Advisory Services, LLC, a registered investment advisor, and through Guardian Wealth Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor. CG Advisory Services, LLC, and Guardian Wealth Strategies, LLC, are separate and unaffiliated entities. The topics discussed on this podcast are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be investment advice or recommendations. Listeners should consult with their own financial professionals before making any investment decisions.